Yes, and I'm alive and I'm awake as well. Good evening, everybody. This is your host for Double Cross Radio, Chuck Horton, and I'm coming to you live from my home in Southern Oregon, as I do each week on Thursday night at this time. And tonight I thought I would go back in history a bit. The things that really interest me in life are economics, history, and economics. So that's what I talk about most of the time. Once in a while, a little bit of politics will seep into it if it's something that's kind of interesting or intriguing. I think it was, well, maybe this just happens every time that there's an election. The person that wins is generally surrounded by just throngs of chanting supporters, and it makes a lot of noise, and they're very just jubilant in the triumph of their candidate. And there's been a couple of exceptions that I'll bring up in a second, but this last week at the New Hampshire primaries, there was just, a deafening roar coming from his supporters. And not that I'm happy about this. I think Bernie Sanders is a disaster waiting to happen for the United States, but we get the government we deserve, I guess. Anyway, this roar from his supporters were going up. I guess they were feeling the burn, and he was pretty excited, as I would be if I was him. It's probably going to be a moment he'll remember the rest of his life. But as they go to the other candidates that were in this election, they go to they went to the Trump supporters, and they were also very, very excited. They weren't quite as boisterous. And Trump gave them it was a fairly vanilla speech, nothing exciting about it for me. And then they switched over to Hillary Clinton, and Hillary Clinton was just screeching out like a crow, and I say, as she does, and that voice that just sounds to me like a chainsaw cutting your leg off. She just, it's just, she should just be thankful the camera didn't pan the nearly empty room. and then it went over to Carly Fiorina, she was speaking, and her room was so empty. There were only some news people there, I'm sure, that her room was so empty the sound was actually echoing off the walls, and I thought that was just too hilarious for words. I say, man, she doesn't get it. And well, she did get it the next day. So I guess someone pointed that out to her, that she had no supporters. Maybe whatever votes there were, the people who voted for her, they probably were people who voted that way by mistake. They thought they meant somebody else. Charlie Fiorina, not Carly. It was that other guy that, who knows. Anyway, she eventually dropped out this week. And the Republican field has narrowed greatly. The only person who was in the losing end of it that had reason to be excited, I think, was John Kasich. Just continuing on that vein, I told you I would tell you about one person's supporters who were still loud and boisterous even in defeat, and that was the 2008 Republican convention, where there was a rally for the Republic. The supporters of Ron Paul gathered in a separate auditorium away from the convention and held a rally to celebrate their views about freedom and to thank their candidate for everything he had done, from the ways he had changed their lives, their way of thinking. And this is a guy that lost, and there was a parade. They had a parade that went from came through town. There was, in the video in the parade, you can see Amy Allen dancing up in front of it, the one that had the Ron Paul anthem, "Wake Up!" there was great speakers there, Tom Woods, and he was one of the ones that spoke at that. And it was just a fabulous event. This is for somebody who lost, but those people knew that their lives had been changed for the better, for the words that Ron Paul had spoken. And Dr. Paul, I just want you to know that you changed my life as well. And just from the words you stated, and those of you who were involved in that celebration, every time I think about it, I'm almost moved to tears. It was just amazing. And the truth will win out eventually. It may not be in my lifetime, but I know that mankind is destined to be free. We all have it. We're born with that instinct and that desire. I don't know where it comes from, but just thank God that it's there. And eventually we will overcome the people who wish to enslave us and tyrannize us. And today we're going to talk about one of those forms of tyranny. Little less than 83 years ago, this was on April 5th, 1933, President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed an executive order number 6102. And that order gave him, or actually forbid the act of hoarding of gold coins, gold bullion, gold certificates within the continental United States. So the effect of the order, in conjunction with the statute under which it was issued, was to criminalize the possession of monetary gold by any individual, partnership, association, or corporation. Now, the stated reason for the order was that hard times had caused hoarding of gold, was stalling the economy. Let me go back and start this again. The stated reason for the order was that hard times, they were in the Depression, had caused hoarding of gold, which was stalling economic growth and making the Depression worse. This is stated in this was in a New York Times editorial on the very next day. Page 16 of the New York Times, April 6, 1933. They wrote under the headline, "Hoarding of Gold, the executive order issued by President yesterday amplifies and particularizes his earlier warnings against hoarding on March 6, taking advantage of a wartime statute that had not been repealed. He issued Presidential Proclamation 2039 that forbade the hoarding of gold or silver coin or bullion or currency under penalty of $10,000 and up to 5 to 10 years of imprisonment." So, yeah, that was the stated reason. I believe the real reason were the banks were about ready to collapse, and the only way they could shore them up was to steal the people's gold and put it in the Treasury and give the Federal Reserve access to it. That's just my own conspiracy theory. That's for what it's worth. I don't have any proof. These people don't, when they do something really illegal, and they don't publicize it. But this was very harsh effects. Here's some of the people that were prosecuted under this executive order, which was unconstitutional, and any state in the Union could have stood up and said, we nullify this executive order. The citizens of our state are protected by the state, and the government can go jam this up as you know what, and put it where the sun doesn't shine. Well, here's some people that were prosecuted under this because their states wouldn't stand up to the federal government. Frederick Barber Campbell. He had on deposit at Chase National Bank. That's a bank which is still in business today, and they're still just as crooked as ever. I believe they're one of the stockholders in the Federal Reserve. But he had in his account, he had deposited over 5,000 troy ounces of gold. Now, today that would be worth about $5 million. I believe that's maybe about $6 or $6 million. It'd be quite a bit. When Campbell attempted to withdraw the gold, Chase refused, and Campbell sued the bank. Well, That's the only recourse he had, apparently. Federal prosecutor then indicted Campbell on the following day for failure to surrender his gold. Ultimately, though, that's quite a deal. You can't get it out of the bank, and they prosecute you for keeping your gold in the bank, and the bank wouldn't let go of it. So that's a hell of a deal. Ultimately, the prosecution of Campbell failed, but the authority of the federal government to seize the gold was upheld, and Campbell's gold was confiscated. So the bank lost it as well, but I think they were kind of in on this whole thing anyway. Another person, Gus Farber, he was a diamond and jewelry merchant in San Francisco. He was prosecuted for the sale of 13 $20 gold coins without a license. Oh, can you believe it? He actually thought he had the freedom to sell 13 $20 gold coins without a license. I mean, heck, where does he think he lives? In the land of the free? The Secret Service agents discovered the sale with the help of a buyer. Could that be a paid informant? Farber, his father, and 12 others were also arrested in 4 American cities after a sting conducted by the United States Secret Service. This was probably part of that sting. The arrest took place simultaneously in New York and 3 California cities. That includes San Francisco, San Jose, and Oakland. So there you go. For 13 $20 gold coins. That's about, gee whiz, 13 $20 gold coins. In those days, $20 would buy an ounce of gold. So that was basically about $260. He was arrested and prosecuted for $260 worth of gold coins. This is quite a bit less than the 5,000 troy ounces and the man had a deposit in his bank. Probably it could have. There were also numerous people that had safe deposit boxes that were full of gold and gold coins, scrap jewelry, different things that were now illegal to own because it was considered hoarding, which had been declared a crime. I tell you that anybody who possesses property and has savings, that's hoarding, I guess, according to this definition. And so there are a lot of, if they can take gold, they can take anything. And they can just say, well, your hoarding is hurting the economy. You need to give up all your assets so you'll have to go purchase more and be a stimulus. I mean, that's kind of how they think. Anyway, that's kind of a background of how that stuff started. And I had a couple other articles that I came across that were kind of interesting on this. By the way, this whole thing started because I read an article in the Bob Livingston newsletter. Bob Livingston's been writing provocative columns for, I don't know, 50 years. I'll say 45 at least. Anyway, he's an awesome writer. I really respect his work. We've made reference to it several times in the years we've been on the air as Double Cross Radio. Anyway, he was talking about just, is gold confiscation a threat today? Certainly some people will say history repeats itself. Other people will say it doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. I just prefer to keep it a little simpler. So if they did it once, they'll try it again eventually. And I think the time is coming close to a point where that could be a reality. A lot of people are in denial. They say, it could never happen. They'd never get away with it. Oh, man, yeah, that's probably what Lavoy Finicum thought. Oh, they wouldn't kill me. I mean, the Americans wouldn't stand for it. Boy, you bring his name up today, you'd think that his name would be on everybody's lips. Hardly anybody knows who he is or who he was. What a senseless waste of a great man's life. Don't ever think that you're so important, your cause is so much a hot button issue for everybody that you go out in a blaze of glory that isn't really glory, and then no one ever knows who you were or what you did. There's just I don't think there's much to that. And I really, gosh, my heart goes out to his family, and they're going to really miss a person of this gravitas, this man this great. But sometimes we let our egos get the better of us, and we think we're greater than we really are. I certainly am constantly humbled on this radio show, thinking I've said something great and I've reached hundreds of people, maybe thousands, to find out I've reached probably 4 or 5. But 4 or 5 is better than 0, and I thank you all who are listening. I hope that I do give you guys things to think about and good factual information that you can act on. But Bob Livingston's letter also brought up one of the things that isn't in any, if you go like this previous stuff I was reading was from Wikipedia, and it failed to mention that the gold was confiscated at $20 an ounce. So the people all brought in their gold, and they were giving $20 for every ounce. And then as soon as the gold had been confiscated, FDR raised the price of gold to $35 an ounce, thus cheating those people out of about 70% of their value of their money. So, that seems to be theft. It's kind of a confidence game. I think that if any ordinary citizen had attempted to do something like that, here, give me all your gold. I hold you at gunpoint. You have to give me all your gold, and then I'm going to give you $20 for every ounce. And then as soon as you've given me all your gold, you can buy it back from me for $35 an ounce. That seems to me to be just a blatantly illegal act. Yet, because he's the president, he is able to do that. That doesn't sound like something that would happen in a free country. So we haven't been a free country for a long time. Please remember that, everybody. Please don't be dulled by the propaganda you hear coming out of the, people that are chest thumpers. I'm an American. I live by the Constitution. Da, da, da. Well, we haven't been living by the Constitution for over 100 years. 1913, we kind of put the Constitution in the dustbin. So since then, we haven't been under a Constitution. We've given away all the freedoms that we had for nothing. We just gave them away. Someone didn't take them from us. We gave them away willingly. This is really sad. So, these are some things that were different then than they are today. In 1933, the gold standard, which had been established, restricted the Federal Reserve's authority to print money to the amount of gold held by the government. Now, they were going through this Great Depression, and one of the theories that had speculated how they could quickly end the Great Depression was proposed by John Maynard Keynes, the famous Keynesian economist, the original Keynesian economist, and he felt that all that was needed was monetary stimulus, and that would create demand where there was none before, and which would stimulate production, and that would get everything rolling again. It's kind of artificial when you do it this way. As they didn't increase the amount of gold that was there, they just, by increasing it to $35 an ounce, they were able to print a bunch more money and flood the country with all this currency. It wasn't really money anymore because they had devalued it, debased the money that was originally stood for $20 worth of gold. I mean, an ounce of gold is $20, period. So now they had collected it. Now an ounce of gold was $35. So they had debased the currency by quite a bit, 75%. Or 70%, excuse me. So that was the reason why they did it. And that was then. Today, the Federal Reserve no longer has those kinds of constraints. With computers, they can create money out of thin air. period. However, there are some limits to this. They do have to have a balance sheet, as any corporation would. They have to follow certain accounting rules. And when they create money out of thin air, it debases the value of their holdings. So they're kind of cutting their own throat, but they're so stupid they still do it because they believe in that Keynesian fairy tale. They believe in the multiplier effect. They believe in all those other things. And in the meantime, they print all this money. It decreases the value of their holdings. It debases any currency they do have on hand. And if you actually were to analyze the Federal Reserve Corporation on a mark-to-market basis, they are bankrupt. That's kind of a shock. When I first read that, I kind of got a pit in my stomach, and I says, well, yeah, I guess I expected that. Why do I feel shocked? Maybe I felt shocked that somebody figured it out and reported it. Okay. If the government is going to confiscate gold, and I believe that that's a possibility, whether it's likely or not, I don't think it's important, but it may be something that they feel is necessary. Certainly they're all about stealing, and they have no conscience to stop them. But I don't really think there's anything you can do to stop them, short of, offering yourself to martyrdom. There are places in the world where you can, where you can probably stash some while things are still relatively calm. But once the shit starts hitting the fan, I don't think anyone believes that there's a place on earth that would stand up to the military might of the United States. They'll just go and take it. So I don't want you to think that there's some way you can outwit these criminals that run our government. You're outgunned, you're outmanned. They've got all the cards. We've got none of the cards. You might want to think of a different way to protect your assets and your life savings. I mean, gold could be valuable as a store of wealth should we enter into a hyperinflationary period, which is entirely possible. But if it looks like the banks are cratering and about ready to collapse, gold is probably going to be taken away from you in order to stabilize them and save the banking industry. And they'll say that it's something they have to do to save the nation, and that people who aren't willing to give up their gold are criminals and are unpatriotic. You'll be demonized by every different sector of society that lives off the largesse of government. So don't think that whistling past the graveyard is going to change anything. Government, you know what kind of animal it is. Know that there's some real crises that are coming in the near future. I don't know how soon it's going to be. Heck, when we first started this program, I thought, well, it's probably, it's a ways down the road. And then we had some interesting guests in that, ended up changing my mind and convincing me it could actually happen any day. Now, most of them would also add that they didn't see this thing changing on a dime, or changing directions on a dime, but they all were, to a man, the people that I listened to read their words. They were also stating that the current course was unsustainable, and the government couldn't go on creating money out of thin air and expect there to be no consequence. It has to come, and it'll eventually start to come as inflation, and they won't be able to stop that inflation because the government debt is so large that to allow inflation rates to go to, just to rise in a market as they should, because all interest is you're buying time. That's what interest is. It's a purchase. It's a transaction. You purchase time. You get your money today rather than later, and you pay the interest that you pay on that money is the time factor. Well, if there's hardly any interest and they're saying that time isn't important, well, of course, time is always important. And you can't ignore market forces and those. By saying that time isn't important, what has happened is we've created a lot of malinvestment. There's money being put into things that it shouldn't be put into because time isn't important. We don't have to worry about future costs. Time isn't important. These interest rates tell us that time is no longer important. Well, it still really is important, and we're taking these assets away from other parts of our economy. And sooner or later, those other parts of the economy say, wait a minute, we're kind of taking it in the short term, and they're going to start bidding up the prices for these things because they want to stay in business and keep producing what they're producing. And there's an actual demand for what they're producing. The other parts, there isn't any demand. If you want to look at what happened in the past, there was the dot-com bubble. That was that is the manifestation of exactly what I'm talking about. And when that failed and went down, there was a housing bubble, which gobbled up even more wealth. And when that failed and took a lot of people down with it, then they started to inflate another bubble. And this bubble is like a banking bubble or a derivative bubble. It's the mother of all bubbles. When this one goes down, it's going to take down the U.S. dollar and the banking industry. And I don't know how much longer it's got, but it's inevitable. It will pop, and it isn't going to take much of anything to send it into just a withering mass on the floor. The bubble is going to collapse. So know that when and if this does happen, that gold confiscation is a reality. It's something that really could happen. And you might want to hoard some other things other than gold or in addition to gold that probably they'll still have a lot of value, like food. Maybe hoard some water filters. Alcohol has always been like money. It was used as money in some economies when they didn't have adequate currency. Alcohol has a long shelf life, and it's always been in demand. There are other precious metals besides silver and gold. There's brass and lead. But here again, just remember, the government has you severely outgunned. So don't be expecting to find any front door wars. However, there may be a lot of value or people seeking ammunition for hunting, to provide food, or for self-protection. So having large amounts of those might be a good commodity for trade. So I guess what I'm trying to say here today is that gold confiscation, don't think it can't happen here. It's already happened here once. And nobody on the side that was doing the criminal activity was ever punished or even historically, nobody has ever said anything bad about it. People haven't pointed out to how this was just blatant theft. And actually, that's not true. There's a couple people that have, but their work has been buried. And when you bring it up, no one's ever heard of it. There's a book on this very subject, FDR taking the people's gold. It's called The People's Pottage. And I suggest you read it. You could probably read it in a couple hours. It's not a lot. It's more of a pamphlet than a book. It's just the story of how he did it, how he basically set himself up to be in office for 16 years and created a war chest by stealing the gold of the American people. And it's an amazing book. It's written by a guy named Garrett Garrett. So that's his name, Garrett Garrett. Now, while I was looking for more information on this, I came across an article written by Jeff Thomas of International Man, and he sounds like he listened to my show before I said it. But I'm going to just read from his transcript here. If you hold precious metals in your portfolio, there's a good chance you fear hyperinflation and the crash of fiat currencies. You probably distrust governments in general and believe that they are self-serving and have no interest in your economic well-being. Well, that's a given. It is likely that your holdings in gold are your lifeline, your hope to get through these times while holding on to your wealth. But have you ever given any thought to the possibility of having this lifeline confiscated by authorities? In my conversations with my friends and associates, I've often raised this question. The typical responses are, they'd never do that. I deal with that when it happens. I just wouldn't give it to them. And he says, I consider these wishful thinking responses. And that's exactly what I was trying to tell you today, is that the sun comes up every day in the east, and if it's inconvenient for you, there's not too much you can do about it. It's still going to keep coming up in the east. You better that you order your life so that you're not dependent on the fact that the sun doesn't come up in the west or doesn't affect your life, and start living with reality. The reality is we live with a dictatorial, fascistic government that will do whatever it wants, and they'll kill its citizens without even a blink of the eye. And that's reality, and you got to live with that. So you don't want to do stupid things. So it's an interesting thought that the greatest threat to gold and silver investment might not be the possibility of losing on the speculation, but the government may take it away from you. There's even other ones that are minor problems that could happen too. Let's say you have some gold and suddenly there's massive hyperinflation. Gold goes to $50,000 an ounce, which some people have wildly thrown out there as a possible endpoint. And you decide to cash in, and so you sell a couple of ounces. You got $100,000, and you pay off your mortgage on your house. And suddenly the IRS is knocking at your door, and they want to know. They want you to hand over your. They have a capital gains tax on commodity speculation, and they consider gold a commodity, and so they wanted you to pay up their, what you owe them for the capital gains on that gold sale that you made. Well, that's a real possibility as well. And then while they're there, they'll go into your house and search it and confiscate any remaining gold you have and pay you face value for the coins and the current value per ounce minus any capital gains taxes that are due. So, and they may not even pay you. They may just take it from you and put you in prison. So, this kind of thinking of what the possible futures might be is something that most people don't think about. Well, Jeff Thomas has. He says, it's a thought that I found few want to even think about, let alone discuss. If you fall into this camp, you're in good company. Some of the forecasters, whom I respect most highly, also treat it either as unlikely or at best something we may need to look at in the future. To date, in conversing with top advisors worldwide, the two primary reasons they believe gold will not be confiscated are: confiscation would mean the government acknowledges the reality of the value of gold. Okay, I guess that's so, but this would also be changing their official view, which of course they do all the time, but I submit that all they need to do is put the proper spin on it. and they are very good at that. They have the mass media networks are very compliant in spreading the propaganda that they're ordered to do so. So the second observation is they would meet greater resistance than they did back in 1933. And I expect that is true, but because back then people were very patriotic. That was the thing to do for America. To be a good American is turn in your gold. And the government won't stiff us. They won't cheat us. They'll give us these paper dollars for our gold dollars. What a great deal. What a great country. We can help them, and we don't lose on the deal until the day after they finished collecting it all, and they lost 70% of the purchasing power of their gold. And it's probably true that there would be more resistance, or at least I think there was quite a bit of resistance in 33. It just didn't get reported. But I think the resistance would be met with violent force and deadly force. And I don't think there'd be very much resistance for very long. Excuse me. So I thought that this guy I'm having all these thoughts today while I was thinking about how I was going to broach this subject, and I read this thing. I said, did this guy just look into my mind and grab all this stuff? I think it's an excellent article. It's at Casey Research. The title of the article is "Don't Dismiss the Possibility of Gold Confiscation." It's by Jeff Thomas, and I recommend it to you all. I want you also, this is from his article again. In 1933, Franklin Roosevelt came into office, immediately created the Emergency Banking Act, which demanded that all those who held gold, other than personal jewelry, turn it in to approved banks. Holders were given less than a month to do this. The government then paid them $20.67 per ounce, the going rate at the time. Following the confiscation, the government declared the new value of gold was $35. In essence, they arbitrarily increased the value of their newly purchased asset by 69%. This alone is reason enough to confiscate. Today, the U.S. government is much worse shape than it was in 1933, and it has much more to lose. The U.S. dollar is the default currency of the world, but it's on the ropes, which means the U.S. economic power over the rest of the world is also on the ropes. I think that readers will agree that the government will do anything to keep from losing this all-important power. But I'm just doing an aside here. I want you to know that repeating the same kind of thinking that got them in this trouble is certainly not going to be the answer to all their problems. It's going to just cause more problems. The U.S. government has essentially run out of options. At some point, the fiat currencies of the first world will collapse. They're already started. The European economy is now in free fall. Yes, the IMF is hoping to create a new default currency, but that too is going to be a fiat currency. I mean, who's going to trust those after all the fiat currencies in the world have collapsed? If any country were to produce a gold-backed currency and sufficient supply of that currency would likely become the desired currency worldwide, fractional banking would be expected. Fractional backing, not banking, would be expected. As most readers will know, the Chinese, the Indians, the Russians, and others see the opportunity and are building up their gold reserves quickly and substantially. If these countries were to agree to introduce a new gold-backed currency, there can be little doubt they would succeed in changing the balance of world trade. Now, we've talked about this on my program a couple times, probably indirectly more, a couple more times. We live above the standard of living that we should live at here in the United States, just due to the fact that the U.S. dollar is the world currency. It allows us to purchase things at lower prices and to sell things for higher prices. What more can you say to that? That's kind of like it's a rigged game, and we're the guys that are benefiting from it, and we're about to, that train ride's about to end. That said, the U.S. government is watching these countries, just as we are. That's Chinese, the Indians, and the Russians, and they are aware of the threat of gold to them. The U.S. government ostensibly has approximately 8,200 tons of gold in Fort Knox, although this may well partially or completely be missing because we haven't had any verification of this. Additionally, it ostensibly holds a further 5,000 tons of gold in the cellar of the New York Federal Reserve Building. Again, there is no certainty that it is there. In general, the authorities don't seem to like independent audits. Of course they don't, because there's been a lot of theft. There is speculation that during the Clinton administration, quite a bit of the gold was removed and replaced with gold-plated tungsten bars that have since been cropping up every once in a while when the Fed sells some of its gold bars, or the government sells some of their gold bars from Fort Knox. In fact, there are rumors that the above vaults are nearly or completely empty, and that the above quoted figures exist only on paper rather than in any physical form. While there is no way to know this for sure, it is not out of the question. And if the U.S. and the EU could come up with a large volume of gold quickly, they could, of course, issue a gold-backed currency themselves. But I don't believe they could. The more gold that they have, the more backed notes they can produce, and the more power they would continue to hold. So if they can't get it out of their vaults, if it's not in Fort Knox, if it doesn't belong, Germany had a lot of their gold sitting in the U.S. at Fort Knox, and they asked for it back, and we said, you can have it back in about 8 years. I said, okay, I guess we'll wait then. That's one of the reasons that people think there's nothing there. If they could somehow find a source of gold, they could then, and quickly amass that source of gold, they could then compete with these other countries that are putting out, they're vying to become a world trading currency, and they could continue to hold that trading power. So who do you think the U.S. government would turn to in such a situation? Could it be they would come after us citizenry, and they would start to take the gold that we own and say, well, you need to give this up because it's a matter of national security. And to go against us on this and to hoard this gold, it's a violation of the Patriot Act, and you'll be sent away to an undisclosed location for an indefinite amount of time. And if you want a lawyer, well, guess what? No lawyer for you. That was the quote, Lindsey Graham, that great American trader. Either they could do that or they could just give up and quit. Now, I don't know what you think is most likely. I think that this article is just full of all sorts of thought-provoking observations and conclusions. I really highly recommend it. I hope that you all have time to read it. I don't have time to read the rest of it for you. And I just wanted to end with a piece by Lou Rockwell from Rockwell.com. And this was also republished at Mises Institute. The title of the piece is The Truth About Politics, and I posted this on our excuse me, I had to do some keyboard work there, on our Facebook page if you want a quick link to it. And I'm just going to read this again. I'm doing a lot of reading tonight. I didn't have time to write this in my own words. So it starts out, the very first votes of the 2016 presidential election season were cast this week in Iowa. This is supposed to fill us with happy thoughts about self-government, civic virtue, rational deliberation about politics as the way the people's will is put into effect. But to the contrary, we should spurn what the establishment would have us celebrate. Politics operates according to principles that would horrify us if we observed them in our private lives, and that would get us arrested if we tried to live by them. The state can steal and call it taxation, kidnap and call it conscription, kill and call it war. And yet we are taught to fear capitalism of all things. But what, after all, are capitalism and the free market? They are nothing more than the sum total of voluntary exchanges in society. When we engage in a voluntary exchange, I buy apples for $5, or when you hire someone for $25 an hour, both sides are better off than they would have been in the absence of such exchange. We can't say the same for interactions with the state, since we pay the state under threat of violence. The state sure winds up better off, though, that's for sure. Business firms increase their profits thanks to some new innovation, cannot rest on their laurels. Other firms will adopt the innovation themselves or improve on them, and those abnormally high profits will dissipate. The original firm must continue to press forward, striving to devise still newer ways to please their fellow man. The state operates under no such conditions. It can remain as backwards as it likes. Other firms are typically prohibited from competing with it. Yeah, just try and form a competing government and see how far you get. The state's priorities arbitrarily override your own. Ethanol is important for the farmers, one candidate says, so because the state has decided some interest group's foolish and economically nonsensical pet project is important, what you yourself would have preferred to do with your money is simply set aside and ignored, and you are forced to subsidize what the state seeks to privilege. Our schools and media portray corporations as sinister and the government as benign, but who wouldn't rather take a sales call from the Norwegian Cruise Line than an audit demand from the Internal Revenue Service? Or imagine if a corporation fabricated a web of untruths, used them as a pretext to launch a violent attack on a people that had never caused Americans any harm, and brought about as many as 1 million deaths and millions more internal and external refugees. That corporation would be broken up and never heard from again. It would be denounced ceaselessly until the end of time. Now, all those things did happen, but they were carried out by the state. And as we know, there have been no repercussions for anyone. No one has been punished. In fact, the perpetrators earn six-figure speaking fees. The whole thing is shrugged off as, at worst, an honest mistake. Some people were still outraged about it, but even they seem to take for granted that there's really nothing that can be done about behavior like this on the part of the American regime. Imagine there were a corporation that was somehow so entrenched that despite being responsible for the staggering death toll, it evaded all responsibility and simply carried on as before. The outrage would be deafening and overwhelming. But so relentless has been propaganda ever since all of us were children about the state's benign nature that many of the people simply cannot bring themselves to think as badly about the state as they have been taught to think about corporations. Even though the crimes of the state put to shame all the misdeeds of all existing corporations put together. Meanwhile, opponents of the state are routinely portrayed as incorrigible misanthropes, when in fact, in light of the state's true nature, we are mankind's greatest advocates. The market brings people together. People of divergent, sometimes antagonistic racial, religious, philosophical backgrounds are happy to trade with one another. Beyond that, the International Division of Labor as it exists today is the greatest, most extraordinary example of human cooperation in the history of the world. I'm going to stop for a second. Think about that. This is cooperation between people who don't even know who they're cooperating with. If you don't understand what I'm talking about, go back and read the essay, I Pencil, and see if you can't figure it out from that. Countless firms produce countless intermediate goods that eventually combine to become finished consumer products. And the entire structure of production in all its complexity is aimed at satisfying consumer preferences as effectively and efficiently as possible. The state, on the other hand, pits us against each other. If one of us wins the state favor, it comes at the expense of everyone else. For one group to be benefited, another must first be expropriated. At one time or another, the state has pitted the old against the young, blacks against whites, poor against the rich, the industrialists against agriculture, and women against men. Meanwhile, all the antisocial effort devoted to extracting favors from the state is an effort that is not available to produce goods and services and increase the general prosperity. In fact, it does the opposite. The market is about anticipating the needs of our fellow men and exerting ourselves to meet those needs in the most cost-effective manner. In other words, by wasting the fewest possible resources and making what we offer as affordable as we can for those we serve. But we need the state. Virtually everyone tells us that. Whether it's monopoly or drugs or the bad guys overseas or the scores of other boogeymen the state uses to justify itself, we're constantly being reminded of why the state is supposed to be indispensable. Yeah, and don't forget the roads. To be sure, these and other rationales for the state sound plausible enough, which is why the state and its apologists use them. But the first halting steps towards intellectual liberation come when someone considers the possibility that the truth about these things might be different from what one hears on TV or learned in school. The small minority of people who administer the state with funds expropriated by the productive private need to justify this situation, lest the public become restless or entertain subversive ideas about the real relationship between the state and themselves. And this is where the state's various platitudes about the people governing themselves, or taxation being voluntary, or government employees being servants of the people enter the picture. Think for a moment just about this last claim, that government employees are our servants. These people staff an institution that decides how much of our income and wealth to expropriate in order to fund itself. They will imprison us if we do not pay, and we are to believe that these people are our servants? For those not gullible enough to fall for such a transparent canard, the rationales become mildly more sophisticated. All right, the state may say, it's not quite right to say that people govern themselves, but they hasten to add, we can offer the next best thing. The people will be represented by individuals chosen from among them. As Jared Casey has argued, though, the idea of political representation is not meaningful. When an agent represents a business owner in negotiation, he ensures that the owner's interests are pursued. If the owner's interests are defended only weakly or ignored or downright defied, the owner chooses different representation. None of this bears any resemblance to political representation. Here, a so-called representative is chosen by some people but actively opposed by others, yet he is said to represent all of them. How can this be? When he can't possibly know them all, or even if he did, he discovered they have mutually exclusive views and priorities. Even if we focus entirely on those people who did vote for the representative, it is their vote supposed to imply consent to his every decision. Some of them may have voted for him not for his positions or merits, but simply because he was less bad than the alternative. Others may have chosen him for one or two of his stances and may have been indifferent or hostile on everything else. How can even these people who actually voted for the representative seriously be said to be represented by him? But the idea of political representation, while meaningless, is not without its usefulness to the modern state. It helps conceal the brute fact that despite all the talk about popular rule and governing ourselves, even the free societies of the West amount to some people ruling and others being ruled. When the results are announced this primary season amid cheers and celebration, then remember what it all represents: the triumph of compulsion over cooperation, coercion over freedom, and propaganda over truth. The civics textbooks may write with breathless awe about the American political system, but this is by far the worst thing about the U.S. Rather than celebrate the antisocial world of politics, let us raise a glass to the anti-politics of the free market, which has yielded more wealth and prosperity through peace and cooperation than the state and its politicians could with all the coercion in the world. And I say, thank you, Ron Paul, and thank you, Lew Rockwell. Lew Rockwell, by the way, was former chief of staff for Ron Paul, and he's one of my personal heroes as well. Everything in this article is the truth, and there's no defying it. I have other heroes out there too, like Larkin Rose, My good friend Drew Lamb. There's a lot of people there that have found the truth, and you can find it too, but you're not going to find it by watching TV, anything mainstream media, reading mainstream media newspapers, listening to mainstream media talking heads. You're only going to find it in alternative news sources, reading on your own with the topics that you select, and doing your own investigation and research. And maybe a few of you will be lucky enough to hear the words of somebody like Ron Paul, and it'll change your life like it changed mine. But don't stand around waiting for that to happen. Go out there and make it happen for yourself. Go pursue the truth and find the truth. You don't need me. You don't need UC Radio, although it's nice to have it here. All you need is yourself and a willingness to know what really happened, who these people really are. And I tell you, it's really sad when we're ruled by a bunch of criminals, by an organized criminal gang that makes the mafia seem like they're Boy Scouts. And you don't need to look very far to find evidence of this. You can just look out on the U.S. Highway 395 in eastern Oregon in a snowbank where the memorial has been set up for a man who was gunned down while his hands in the hair was shot in the back. A government can do this and get away with it, and there hasn't even been an investigation. So don't think your gold can't be confiscated. Don't think it won't be. You better get ready for that. You better have a plan B in hand. And the plan B, I don't think transferring your money to an out of country bank is necessarily going to be. It might delay that moment for a while. I don't think it's going to be the solution to your problem. Okay, I hear the music. It's time to go for tonight. Thanks for listening to me rant and rave. I hope everybody has a good weekend and enjoys themselves. I'll be back next week with another episode of Double Cross Radio. Thank you. Good night.